From the News Channel 5 network, this is Inside Politics.
Hello, everyone. I'm News Channel 5's political analyst Pat Nolan. Welcome to Inside Politics. As we enter the 6th week of the war between Russia and Ukraine, is either side winning an advantage over there? Are we seeing signs of a possible peace settlement on the horizon? Or are we headed towards a protracted conflict that could last for months, perhaps even years? Throughout this crisis, we have looked to Dr. Thomas Schwartz, professor of history and political science at Vanderbilt University, for guidance, for insights, and for answers to what is happening on the ground in that war and what may lie ahead. Dr. Schwartz is our guest again on Inside Politics. Dr. Schwartz, thank you again for joining us. We really appreciate you coming on the show.
Well, thank you very much for having me here.
The biggest new development in the last few hours has been that Russia claims that the Ukraine forces have launched an attack inside Russia, not very far inside the border, but they have apparently used helicopters to attack a military depot there. Why are the Ukrainians not taking credit for it at this point?
Well, it may be that they both want to leave a certain amount of ambiguity about it. It may be that they want, or that they may not have done it. I mean, it is possible that this could be a Russian operation to promote to their own people the idea the Ukrainians are attacking us. We need to do more. So there's a number of possibilities here. On the one hand, if the Ukrainians really did it, not owning up to it immediately might be a way of letting the Russians know on the sly that there's going to be more in the future.
I guess no matter who's responsible for it, this is a potentially very dangerous escalation of this war.
Yes, I mean, it would indicate that the war could get much, much uglier, that the Ukrainians have capacity to inflict damage on the Russians that they were previously underestimated at. On the other hand, if it is a way of a false flag operation by the Russians, it could be used as a justification for a serious escalation of their use of violence against the Ukrainians.
All this comes after early in the week there were some actual peace talks held in Turkey about this. Both sides presented some kind of plans on both sides. Was there much more than a show there? I mean, some of the things I saw that were offered didn't seem to me to be very credible that any chance the other side might accept them.
Well, I think what's interesting about the talks is, of course, excuse me, what we do know. Namely, that the Ukrainians are willing to accept some form of neutrality, or at least not joining NATO. That is a particularly important concession. On the other hand, whether that actually the fact that they also want security guarantees of the sort that Russia probably would not admit is also important.
Yeah, security guarantees were going to be like the United States and NATO and others come in and they guarantee the peace, almost like they would get NATO security, because NATO is, if one of our countries is attacked, we immediately come to their defense. This would be that without them being members of NATO.
Absolutely, yes. That
the
would
Russians want to not join NATO, but they would never let them do this. Almost look like a back door.
Yes, and I mean, the only way that could happen is if it seemed as though Ukraine really is winning, and this would be a face-saving thing for Putin.
On the other side, Russia offered in their proposals at the peace talks earlier in the week that they would drastically reduce their military activity in the eastern part of Ukraine, and maybe a lot of the major cities are located there. They'd also pull back from the capital of the country, where there's been so much fighting, and a lot of those terror attacks have gone on there as well. Why are the Russians offering that? Is that part of their strategy to maybe try to come in there and divide the country rather than conquer the whole thing, since they obviously have failed at conquering the whole?
Yeah, this is the argument is, I mean, on the one hand, this also is a way of saying to their people, we are taking a more moderate, our goals are more limited, and this could be a way of saying that to their own people. On the other hand, the Pentagon, I think, seriously thinks that what they're doing is redeploying forces, moving them from Kiev toward the eastern provinces and trying to gain more territory for the Donbass and Luhansk regions, which are still claiming territory that they don't control. So it could be a part of this overall plan to divide the Ukraine.
You have had this conversation before. I think from the beginning you thought perhaps Russia's goal was just to get enough territory they could at least connect the provinces that are that have already broken away, and the Russians have conquered from the last time they incurred over there, just to make that a more cohesive geographically piece of country that they could then control a larger part of Ukraine.
Well, they are almost there in the sense of having, they probably will be occupying Mariupol within a matter of days, and so that whole coastline now is controlled, or at least seems to be controlled, by Russia, and so that would provide sort of a land bridge between the eastern territories they control and the Crimea.
This change in tactics, both seen in the peace offer and the other things, was sort of talked about this previous weekend when the Russians said, well, we've finished phase 1 of the project, and now we're going to move on to phase 2, as if they'd already won phase 1 and done that. Did the Russians kind of admit by the back door that phase 1 failed? Because phase 2, whatever they're doing, phase 1 certainly hasn't worked.
Yes, I think the difference is, of course, that there's two audiences here. The audience at home is hearing phase 1, now we're going to move into phase 2, and without the admission of failure. And a foreign audience, with our suspicions about what their real goals were, do hear that. But I think there is this disconnect between what they're telling their own people and what we're hearing.
Getting back to the Ukrainian side, would they ever agree to their country being divided the way North and South Korea is? I mean, would they let the provinces that have already gone away go away permanently, like the Crimea, or will they just always resist that? I mean, I don't want to give some security guarantees, but probably not that way. I think interesting here is to think in terms of the other divided countries in the world, say Germany and Korea. Neither of those countries has never ever admitted the legitimacy of the other partner. So it could be the case, you could get a de facto division of the country that the Ukrainians do not accept, and argue that over time, as happened in the case of Germany, has not happened in the case of Korea, that you would get reunification. Vladimir Putin this week also indicated, I think he's going to induct into the service draft 135,000 more Russians to go into the service. They sort of said they don't think they'll be going into the Ukraine, but do you really buy that? Do you think this is a sign that the war is going to intensify even more?
This conscription probably is needed to make up for some of their losses. I don't think this is necessarily an indication of an escalation as much as it may be an indication of how badly they've done. It takes a while to turn a conscript into an active fighter, so unless he's thinking a very long-term battle.
Dr. Tom Schwartz of Vanderbilt University is our guest on Inside Politics. We're talking about the latest situation in the invasion of Russia into the Ukraine. Back to continue our conversation after you watch these messages.